Hello, my name is Elizabeth Pierce, and I'm a senior studying political science, international relations, and I have a minor in political communication. And today I will be talking to you about the influence of rules of engagement in context to our current in political context. So the rules of engagement are a set of guidelines by the UN, so troops in combat have an outline for ensuring structure and procedure while aligning with international law. And this helps troops adhere to military guidelines and react in a humanitarian way during the tensions of conflict. And this has to align with international laws like the Geneva Conventions through political factors that often affect the adherence of this. And though we don't see political conflict or war as a humanitarian way in any shape or form, the rules of engagement actually act as a divide for what is political and what is humanitarian during conflict and acts as a balance between the two. And this is what we are looking at today, to see what is best politically for the world that we are living in today and what is to come with that. So the best way to look at this is, this is a clip about what the rules of engagement are.
Much hard work. In 2005, the United States established standing rules of engagement for its fighting forces. The rules of engagement are the primary tools for regulating the use of force in combat. Now, while incorporating traditional rules of combat for civilized nations, such as the Geneva Conventions and what are typically referred to as the rules of law, the rules of engagement also...
Okay. So what are the issues with the rules of engagement? There's often operational limitations on politics and humanitarian issues, where the guidelines make it challenging to respond to threats or determine when it's appropriate to respond. And with that goes the morale and decision-making of this, where unclear or overly restrictive rules of engagement can create confusion amongst troops, and that potentially impacts their confidence in decision-making under fire. And this is especially difficult because these decisions have to be made quickly and especially during conflict. And this goes into the political context where it influences the ethical implications of rules of engagement, particularly in balancing the military objectives with humanitarian considerations. And we have to look at cases where they're suicide bombers, where they're willing to die for a cause and they're willing to kill themselves and the others around them in this situation. And the best way to look at this, and it's the case of Fallujah in Iraq in 2004. This happened because 4 military contractors from Blackwater, USA were ambushed and killed. And at this point, the insurgents had taken over the city of Fallujah and Operation Vigilant Resolve was launched.
This guy down to me was, every single time I had lost a friend or we had taken an IED, we were the victim. We would walk on a patrol and something would blow up and a guy would die, or a guy would get hit by a sniper and it would always react to nothing. You weren't going to shoot into a crowd. We're American soldiers. We don't do that. We're not going to act like a barbarian.
And this is a clip of a troop who was actually in Fallujah, and he's talking about his experience with rules of engagement and how that impacted their decisions while they were there. And Fallujah was a case of urban warfare, which is not our typical combat that we would see. It's typically in urban terrains and cities where the combatants or the non-state actors look like normal people, but they're not. So it makes it especially difficult. And with this battle, there was an aggressive measure taken to clear out insurgents in civilian areas. And the proportionality of this was difficult because there was an urgency to clear the buildings quickly while minimizing the soldier risks, as it conflicted with the need to distinguish between the combatants and civilians. This was especially difficult in deciding what the proportionality of the decisions being made were going to be. So this had a rational approach from the military, where the aggressive approach during the second battle allowed the U.S. forces to defeat the insurgents and reclaim the city. This was more goal-oriented rather than the first one was more, we need to save the civilians. And this was difficult because there was a lot of concealment and confusion, with insurgents who blurred the lines between civilian combatant spaces by using homes, schools, and mosques for cover for attacks. So this made it especially difficult. And with the protection of civilians, there were efforts made to clear out the civilians, but many were unable to leave and were caught in that crossfire, making this decision especially harder when they were making that decision on what to do during the battle. So we have to ask ourselves what the political context is, especially with our policy goals and diplomacy. And we look at issues today with what's happening in the Middle East with Lebanon, Israel, and Iran, and how the tensions are rising every day, and we see this every day. We have to ask ourselves what's going to be best diplomatically for us, and especially with the criticisms from the media, that ask ourselves what is best globally for conflict, and can they be prevented with preemptive measures? So with our deterrence methods, are we going to take a proactive and preemptive response to this, or are we going to be reactionary to this? And it can oftentimes be way too late to react to that decision that's being made. And especially with adaptive rules of engagement, we can take these by a case-by-case situation and decide on what's going to be the appropriate response in these conflicts. And especially with technological advances that we have today, we have to look at what the international laws say about this. So I have to ask you one question on what the morality of this is. So are we going to change what are we going to change in our political context in order to save lives and minimize the spread of conflict globally? And are we going to save 2 lives to lose 50 or lose 2 lives to save 50? And we have to choose the lesser of the two evils in this situation. Thank you.